You're listening to Passions and Prologues, a literary podcast where each week I'll interview an author about a thing they love and how it inspires their work. I'm your host, Adam Sokol, and if you're new here, thanks so much for joining. If you've been here for a while, thanks for coming back. Today's episode is with mystery and thriller author Leah Konen. We talk about her new book, You Should Have Told Me, which is a really, really delightful mystery that very much keeps you guessing chapter after chapter. But before we get into her book, we talk about her love of online gaming and specifically World of Warcraft and how it helped her husband and her bond while they had a new baby during the pandemic. And we talk about my own past life with the old World of Warcraft and specifically Warcraft games when they first came out. It's a lot of fun. We get to nerd out for a little while. We also get into the art and structure of creating a thriller and like a murder mystery. I really love the conversation that you'll hear in just a little bit where we get into this notion that people have to come up with a twist that no one sees coming, when in reality, if you are enjoying a book and you see the twist coming, that doesn't make it a bad book. That still is something, people wear a badge of honor when they're able to see a twist coming. So it's really interesting. We get into a bunch of different things. It's a very wide-ranging conversation, and Leah was a blast to chat with. Before we get to that, I want to offer you a book recommendation. This is a little bit older, and it was a bestseller all over the place, and it's very short, but I just read it for the first time a couple weeks ago. A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It is such a strange little story. It is this monk who hands out tea, and people get to kind of share their thoughts and troubles with them during the cup of tea that they're enjoying, and then they kind of go on their day. It's almost like enjoying therapy. But it also tells the story of how this monk is a bit unhappy or unfulfilled with their life. And so they go out into the wild, and this story takes place after this massive change in the world where robots became sentient, and then humans basically like enabled them to go and live off on their own. And so these robots live in the wild, and they are not approached by humans unless the robots want to, and they've never wanted to until this monk ends up meeting a robot while he's basically going off on an adventure. And then what ends up happening is this really delightful short story of this monk and this robot getting to know each other and understand each other's, societies, basically, and asking tough, big questions that we all ask. It's really adorable. It's really fantastic. I just really, really loved it. So I think you're going to enjoy that very much. If you happen to miss it, over the weekend, I did a bonus episode of Backlist Book Recommendations with Tina from TBR Etc. and the Book Talk Etc. podcast. I know a lot of you may have listened to this podcast for the first time because of that. So if you're new here, again, thanks for being here. But if you did miss that, go check it out. We gave over a dozen backlist book recommendations that we really had a lot of fun handing out. So I think you'll really enjoy that. And if you are new here, I have an email address, passionsandprologues@gmail.com. You can send me your passions, anything you're passionate about, just let me know. And every single month I hand out a random bookshop.org gift card just to somebody who sent me one of those emails. I really love reading them. And then also, if you leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast, just go ahead and screenshot that and send it to my email. Again, passionsandprologues@gmail.com. And I'll give you some customized book recommendations. And last but not least, you can find me at Passions and Prologues on TikTok and Instagram, where I talk about books all the time. Okay, that is all the housekeeping. I am so excited for you to listen to this discussion with Leah Konen, author of You Should Have Told Me, on Passions and Prologues. Leah, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me. And what is the thing you're super passionate about that we're going to be discussing today?
So I am really passionate about kind of gaming, whether it's board games or, video games. I think I'm not like a crazy gamer, like the most seasoned person, but especially over the last few years, I've gotten really big into World of Warcraft.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so they re-released the classic version a few years ago, and I actually never played it when it originally came out, but my husband was super into it. And so we kind of became it aligned right with when I was pregnant with my daughter and in early parenthood, and it kind of became like our release for like all that stress. So it was a huge part of our early days, and have actually just got back into it this winter.
At the risk of like revealing my age, although I've done that a bunch of times in this podcast. I actually did play the original one, and you saying World of Warcraft, I specifically remember my best friend growing up. His name was Kurt. I like can not only can I remember sitting in their den playing the original Warcraft and like World of Warcraft and doing like all the different campaigns and everything, but like I can remember like these specific phrases and stuff that like the different like the yes me lord like there was all
Oh
these
yeah,
different
yeah, the different NPCs say, yeah, I know. You
yeah
get it gets really stuck in your head.
Yeah. So I'm assuming I have an idea as to why, but what got you guys into it over the last couple of years? I'm assuming it might be having time on your hands with the pandemic, but how did you kind
Yeah,
of?
I mean, the pandemic really pushed it. I think it started before the pandemic. It was kind of like we were waiting. Oh yeah, we were waiting for the baby to come, and I was like past my due date, but we like both kind of like paused our work and we're kind of just waiting. So we had like nothing to do. So we were just like playing WoW and like watching Jeopardy. And and then it was funny. It actually turned out to be like a really like fun pandemic thing, but also to have with like a young baby because they do actually sleep a lot. And then even when they're like awake, they're kind of just like hanging out, like in one spot.
Mhm.
So, and then both of us would play it. So we kind of like, we'd be like in a raid, and my husband would like tell like the group that like I had to just pop out for 10 minutes to like go feed my daughter. Um,
Oh.
but yeah, and it was a perfect pandemic thing because it felt like the people in our guild were like the only people we interacted with during the
Mhm.
pandemic. So it would kind of feel like you were part of these weird like little parties. So yeah, it was kind of the ultimate like remote social distancing thing you could do.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's this. I feel like it's the same reason why like so many of us got into like the Jackbox games, all these things. It was like
Yeah.
a way to feel like you were connected to people without obviously being in person. So with there being like a million different options, what was it about World of Warcraft that was kind of the thing that you both chose to fall into?
So my husband had been really into it and he had like all the nostalgia for it. And I remember I was certainly old enough to have played it when it came out, but I remember just from hearing about it, like World of Warcraft, I thought it was going to be something completely different than it was. And so when I actually like jumped in and started playing, I was like, oh wow, it's just like Lord of the Rings, but I can like run around and control it. This is incredible. Um, so I think what I loved about it is there's like enough storytelling. There's a lot of fun dialogue, there's a lot of fun like backstories, but then there's just so many options and choices that you can make. And it's also so many different kind of paths you can take. Like I got really into making potions and harvesting herbs and then like selling them for like this huge like um cost like on the
Mhm.
auction house. Like I was like the herb and potion like pure capitalist, like opposite of how I am in real life. I was like, let me take all the money here. um so it was just kind of like it was fun that it's like a little microcosm of society.
Mm-hmm. I you mentioning like how you chose to play is so that's always so interesting to me where when it is a game like World of Warcraft or like these big open world games that you can choose like Elder Scrolls, there's different things that you can choose to be any type of character you want to be. It is really interesting what people choose. And so like what was it about leading you down that path? Like you said, you found a lot of interest in like the herb collecting and all these different things. What was it about that path that intrigued you?
So I think one of the reasons why I was kind of a late to life gamer is I never like shooting or like fighting games. Like the Elder Scrolls, I actually like the world, but especially like Skyrim, the combat was like too intense where I would just get nervous and like
Hmm.
drop the controller and I'm like, I can't. So what I loved about WoW was like there were so many parts of the game where you didn't have to be like actively fighting, and then you could choose to like go into fighting mode if you're doing, you know, a raid or a battleground or whatever. But I liked that there were so many parts of the world where you were just kind of like being a character and interacting with people, and I thought that part of it was just really fun.
Yeah, I feel like exactly what you said about like the fighting. I for a while I got very into the new Zelda game. Well, I guess it's not
Mhm.
that new at this point, but like the same reason.
Yeah.
Like I could just get lost and like I could spend an hour and a half like riding a horse around a beautiful like green pasture or just like climbing the tallest place I could find without ever like encountering any enemies. I know exactly what you mean. Like I'm the type of person been I don't game anymore, but I have always been like somewhat fascinated by the gaming world and like since I was a kid. And what I tend to be just like blown away by is just being like, oh my God, somebody like people put this together. Like they built this world that we can now live in. And like it's not it's it's very similar to like writing books. It's just like the fact that they obviously it's a team of people, but like they're able to constantly come up with these quests and these raids and like just these new areas. To me, I'm always fascinated by that type of stuff.
And I think that's to me what's been so interesting is like growing up in the like 80s and 90s, I thought the gaming was just like, Nintendo and like, having seeing Mario and Luigi jump around. And then to see that like now it's such incredible both visual art and storytelling. And I mean there's some games that are like they go crazy with storytelling. And I think with so many independent games too, like I actually do get inspired with my writing by some of the gaming I do, and vice versa. It's like there's truly like I really think that it is an art form just like anything else. And people who maybe haven't like experienced it or gone into some of these newer games maybe don't realize or kind of judge it like, oh, it's just video games. But they've come a long way. I mean, there's some
Hmm.
really incredible stuff out there.
Yeah, can you kind of touch on that a little bit? How like you've been inspired from like a storytelling standpoint? Because like the one that I think that sticks out the most to me, again, I haven't played a ton of games lately, but I did play Hades like all the way through. I don't know if you're familiar,
Okay.
but that is one where it is like obviously it's all of the like Greek mythology and like just the storytelling in there. There's so much like there was something like the script for this for the game was like 1.2 million words, like just an insane amount
Wow.
of words.
Yeah.
But can you touch on what you were saying a little bit about like how you've been inspired from a storytelling standpoint from games and how it kind of connects to writing?
Sure. Well, if I can go full 80s baby for a moment,
Yeah,
I'll say I was always also really into the choose your own adventure books, if you remember
absolutely.
those.
Oh yeah.
So I think there's something so interesting about feeling like you're reading a story, but that you do have some sort of control. And I mean, perhaps like if we're going to get all psychoanalytical about it, perhaps that's what could have led me to writing and storytelling because it's like, you have the story, but you're kind of pulling the strings there. But I really think really good games kind of create that feeling again of of a really good choose your own adventure and kind of that magic of being a kid and feeling like you had a little bit of power over the story. Um, but there's so many more choices now, in a game
Mhm.
than there are in like a tiny little chapter book. So I think it's kind of just, I think with every book, even though a reader doesn't have a choice, I think you want to ideally create a world that is as compelling as something like you would find in like the best video game, right? Except for that world is, of course, in your head. And so I think there are a lot of parallels there. And it's just the kind of thing where it's like compelling stories, no matter what the medium,
Mhm.
really hook people. And it doesn't matter if it's a movie or a TV show or a book or a video game, but like that's what people want. People want a story that just like sweeps them away and takes them into this world.
So do you find because your newest book, you should have told me like it is set in a like a real, like the real world. Do you find yourself drawn to, because I from when it comes to books that I read, I tend to be character and plot driven as opposed to like atmosphere or
Uh-huh.
setting. But if I were to choose a game to play, like I will probably find myself be like, oh, what's the atmosphere like? Like, give me this huge open world. So for you, are you drawn to books that tend to be more like that huge sprawling type of a story, or do you focus on like the story itself helping you lose yourself as opposed to the setting?
I think personally, I think the story itself as opposed to the setting. I mean, I always think settings are important. I think even in a more intimate, realistic setting, you still do get that whole world. I think, especially like with You Should Have Told Me, like the setting is Kingston, New York. It's like a mountain town between like the Hudson River and the Catskill Mountains, right north of New York City. But really, the setting is like living as a mother who has a 6 week old infant. And like that to me is like kind of being in Janie's head for that as things are unraveling and her partner is going missing and all these things are happening. To me, that is a world. Like that's a whole world. And it's a world that it's actually like, yeah, it's not fantasy, but like until you experience it, like there's no, everyone will be like, oh yeah, baby can be hard or whatever. But until you are actually living it, there's no way to prepare yourself for it.
Mhm.
So I think in ways books do kind of like open us up to these worlds, even if they aren't fantasy or some kind of, fantastical like Dune, kind of place. Like they still are opening us up into the worlds of someone of a certain character's head. And to me, that's what's like so fascinating.
Yeah, and so we should say for people who haven't read, You Should Have Told Me Yet, the kind of crux and like launching point of the plot. I don't want to give too much away, but Jane's the main character, just had a baby, needs a break, kind of lies down. Her partner is like, I'll, take care of the baby. It's like, just relax. And when she wakes up, her partner is gone, and then there's some unsavory things that happen that he gets accused of. It again, I don't want to give too much away, but
Sure. Yeah.
with that, like that type of story, and you having a newborn, you were mentioning like spending so much time with your partner playing like different games and stuff, like what launched this idea in your head, and like what made you want to tell this story?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wrote the first like 75 pages of the book probably about, I think when my daughter was about 6 months old. So I had just like been in it and I had had a lot of very similar feelings that Janie is struggling with that I think are incredibly common. And when I was talking to other mothers, I found that a lot of people had experienced almost the exact same thing, but
Mm.
there's so much shame around it that people wouldn't even talk about it. And people were like DMing me and saying like, I felt this way too, and I didn't even tell my husband because like it just felt so wrong to be like, oh, I don't know if I feel connected to my baby, when you're supposed to feel this like very immediate like love. So I had kind of just been in it, and then uh my daughter was born, and then it was immediate like global pandemic. So it was just a really wild, isolating time to like raise a newborn. And so it kind of just, for me, it was like based on that, but it was like, what if I turn the volume up to like 100? And so to me, like, you're already in it. It's already like a thriller. It already feels like a war zone, just like taking care of a child. But then it's like, if the one person who's like your partner there and supposed to be, helping you is just gone, like, how scary. Like, to me, there was nothing scarier than that idea. Like, I remember like in the early days, like my husband would like go out to like check on his garden for like 5 minutes. And if it took like 6 minutes, I'd be like, oh my God, where is he? Like you feel so much like you just need someone else to be there with you, kind of like suffering alongside you. And so I really wanted to capture that, but of course I write thrillers, so I wanted to kind of intersect that with like a classic murder mystery. And I think putting the two together like created a lot of interesting ways to go, like not only about what actually happened and who's the murderer and all that, but like how well do we know that the people that we love and the people that we think, we can trust with everything.
Yeah. Did writing this feel like you said, kind of at least the first like 75 pages and while you were like literally in it, as you were saying, like did it feel like a good escape? Because I feel like we all need like when we're in the midst of a highly stressful situation, especially like you said, like in the middle slash beginning of the pandemic, like when there was just nothing, there was no way for us to get out. Like I imagine it had to feel a little bit like an escape to actually get to write these things out in a fictional way that wasn't like harmful to anyone in your life.
Totally. Yeah, it was really cathartic. And I mean, I think if like I couldn't have written it like in those first few months, like it was just too close. But I think at that point, like I had started to feel a lot better. It was the summer, the pandemic was like, everything was still happening, but at least it was summer, so we were able to like maybe like meet some people outdoors and stuff like that. And and then my daughter also had like she had just kind of started to like really nap in a reliable way. So I felt
Mm.
like I just had like a little bit of space. And it really kind of just like poured out. Like I didn't come into it thinking like I want to write a book about motherhood or whatever. I kind of just sat down one day and the first bit just like it was just there.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because then as I continued to like write the book and the more like mystery parts and all that, when I went back to revise like a year later, I would look at those first pages and be like, whoa, Leah, like, were you okay? Like, this is a little dark, you know? And I think actually like, I don't know that I would have been able to write it like now. Like, I
Hmm.
think just like it being so fresh and so raw was kind of just like how it came, at least for the beginning, like how it needed to be.
Yeah, I do think like a different situation entirely, but like I'm querying a novel now, and the when I wrote it, I was like very, very down and depressed, and like I didn't know how to externally convey those feelings yet. Like I hadn't started going to see a therapist and like how to understand how to use my words, speaking of like babies and children. But the only way that I could like have an outlet was to write the story. And like you said, I don't think I could write that same story now, being weirdly like being in a much better mental place.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean, where it's like sometimes the only way to get like to feel less frustrated with what's going on in your mind is to put it out in the
Well,
world.
yeah. I mean, and writing it down, I think helps. And I think it helps you, but it also helps other readers who everyone's been in a place like this at some point, And I think sometimes reading about it through a fictional character is actually, it's a lot easier than even just talking with a friend or, reading about depression or something like on the internet. Like
Mhm.
reading it through even if it's not real and it is fiction, I think just the way it can get so personal to get in someone's head can just be really, really helpful and satisfying for people.
Do you find as a writer of like thrillers and murder mysteries, do you find yourself drawn towards those types of books as a reader, or do you kind of like go completely left field and stay away from them?
No, I'm like, I write thrillers because all I was reading was thrillers. Like, this is what I love. And I was actually, for a while in my career, I was writing young adult, more like romance, contemporary romance, and which is really fun. But I think the reason why I made the leap is because I looked at what I was actually consuming and it was like thrillers, mysteries, horror. I'm a huge horror movie fan. So
Mhm.
like that was everything I was taking in and like I grew up on like Hitchcock and like old noirs and stuff. And so I was just like, why am I not doing this? And I think part of it was just like the fear of being able to like pull off a mystery because it is like kind of a different skill set and it's can be kind of scary to like jump into something you haven't done before. But as soon as I started, I felt like, oh, this is like what I wanted to be doing. Like this is kind of hitting my stride, like kind of feeling that.
Yeah, and I think I saw you might have said something on Twitter about this, and I totally agree with you about like I know that there's always pressure writing a thriller to like come up with a twist that no one sees coming, but I think you said something about like, so what if you saw it coming? Like the purpose of a story is to enjoy it, and like yeah, if you still want to like see how it happens, and I feel like that's the same. It is interesting because like if I guess the plot of a movie, I'm still gonna watch it. Like it doesn't mean I'm gonna enjoy it any less. And honestly, I'll probably be like, oh my God, I knew that, I saw that coming, and like I don't want to talk about it even more. And like I feel like the same is true for reading thrillers. Like if I figure out something beforehand, like that doesn't make me like the book less. That makes me like want to talk about the book more. So I feel like once you understand that, like is it is it that feeling writing a thriller like I need to come up with something that no one will see coming? Or I guess like can you kind of walk me through that aspect? Because every thriller needs like a twist or a hook that you write in there at some way or somehow.
Totally. So, and I do think my books tend to have like a lot of reveals and twists, but I think for me, I think the perfect twist would be like one that 4 out of 5 readers are gonna not get, and like 1 out of 5 is gonna get. Like that kind of just like, because I think you want to have it, if it comes completely out of left field, it might surprise everyone, but it's not satisfying.
Mhm.
And I think like one of my editors always says, like, he's like, what you want to do is like when the reader gets to it, they want to immediately like page back through the book and be like, oh my God, she gave me a hint there, and how did I not see it? And like kind of you put together like all those like Easter eggs and everything.
Mhm.
So like I think also realistically, readers are so well read, so clever, so smart, especially in this genre. So it's like you're gonna have people who get it. And I think that's okay. But I think it's nice to like keep people on their toes as well.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about like the like it can't come completely out of left field. Like I love much like so many other readers. Like I love Agatha Christie stories, but I feel like there's some of her stories where the end, like when Hercule Poirot does his big reveal, like he'll basically say stuff where you're like, none of that was ever in the text. Like, of course
Yeah.
no one saw this coming. So so for
You're like,
you,
wait, I don't remember who that character was.
yeah, exactly. So I'm just like, wait a minute. Yes, you're right. I couldn't have seen this coming, but it's also because you didn't introduce that character until page like 280. But for
Yeah.
you, when you are like, when you're writing a story, like you should have told me, do you know what the end is going to be? And so you're leaving hints as you go, or do you kind of, as you're drafting, realize the twists in real time and then have to go back and like drop those Easter eggs for your readers after the fact?
So I think it's a mix of both. I think with this one, with actually the first two, with All the Broken People and The Perfect Escape, I actually changed killers in the revise. So like I like fully went in a different direction. This one, I think I kind of anticipated that that was going to need to happen, so I did it as I was drafting. But I definitely have like I think the bigger twists are there and the bigger reveals are in my head and they're kind of maybe being hinted towards. But then you definitely discover stuff as you go and you have to go back and layer it in. But I think something interesting that happens, regardless if you know ahead of time or you don't, is that as an author, you kind of feel like you can put these hints in that you're trying so hard not to be heavy-handed that it's just like, it zooms right past everybody. So I think usually what happens is like my reader or my editors rather, and my beta readers will be like, oh, it would be great if you seeded this twist like in Act 1 and Act 2 or whatever. And I'm like, I did though. You just
Yeah.
didn't see it because we read so fast. And like if an author put something in that like was literally one line, people could just like zoom right by it. But then on the flip side, if every single other chapter they talk about their weird neighbor or something,
Yeah.
like then, you're like your your radar is up. So I think it's just like constantly going back and through revisions and finding that balance of like making it clear enough that like it piques some interest, but not so heavy-handed that it's like, oh, this is obviously the answer.
Yeah, and you're right. Like as the writer, that one line feels so obvious to you, but you're right. Like there's so many people who will like no matter like randomly on a page will like skim half of the paragraph and they just won't even see that line. Like you're absolutely right.
Totally.
Yeah, that's
I was just reading a Twitter thread that I had no idea people do this, but I learned that a lot of people read audiobooks on like 2 and 3x speed. And I had no idea this was a thing. I think I'm a pretty fast reader, but I must be a slow listener, because I'm like 1x is good for me. I'm like, I need to take it in. But it just blew my mind that people are able to comprehend stuff that quickly.
So I listen at 1.5 when I'm listening to
Okay.
audiobooks, but I will say I am online friends with Julia Whalen, who's like one of the most famous audiobook narrators around, and she's been on this podcast, and I've interviewed her a few times, and we're like I said, we're buddies, and we've talked about this, and she gets so mad that people will speed up their listening because she's like, I'm reading this in a specific way to put this specific tone, but yeah, I couldn't do like 2 or 3x, but I will admit, I hope she's not listening to this episode. I will admit that I listened to like 1.5 because I feel like there's like most narrators of audiobooks, that's the purpose is to like slow down so that they get every syllable and word, and you're just like, oh my God, come on, let's go. But yeah, but 2 and 3, that is too much.
Although maybe 1.5 is like the gateway drug, and maybe like in a couple years you'll be back here and you'll be like, I'm at 3x now.
Listen, I will say, having used to work for Overdrive and the app Libby, one of the things, I'll give it some free promotion because I love everyone there and I will still use the app every day. One thing Libby lets you do is you can speed up by like 0.05%. So you can go from like 1 to 1.05 to 1.1 to 1.15. And so that's how I sorted it. I built myself up to like to 1.5 over time, because if you
Like,
move it up by like 500ths, you don't really even notice.
yeah,
And then you just keep doing that. But
you're like, it's like a marathon runner, like training. You're
100%.
just slowly building
Yeah.
tolerance.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I have one last question for you. I always leave the episode by having the author give a recommendation of any kind that you want. It could be a book, it could be a game, I've had somebody say like go for a walk, or it could be anything that you want to recommend that you think more people should know about, a TV show, a movie. Again, it could be a book if you want, but anything you want to recommend, the floor is yours.
Okay, I have a fun one that I just rediscovered. It's a board game called Code Names. Have you
Okay.
played this?
I have
Code
not.
Names. It's really fun. It's strategy, but it's like it only takes like 20 minutes to play, and you can play it with like 4 people. And the conceit is that you're all spies, and so you have to get people to guess the words, but you can only give a one-word clue.
Mm.
So it's like kind of taboo, but like reverse. It's really fun. And why I love it as a writer and a storyteller is you're giving a one-word clue, but your goal is to connect like 2 or 3 different words. So it gets you thinking about how, with one word, to connect like several different concepts. And it's just like super fun party game or just with a couple friends. But I think it really actually has you thinking in kind of a really creative way.
I love that. That is so perfect. Yeah, anyone, again, you'll have heard me talk about it in the intro, but if you haven't yet, go get your copy of You Should Have Told Me. It is so wonderful. It's literally, none of you will see this, but Leah will. It's literally right next to my desk. I'm literally holding it right now. It is so wonderful. Leah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Passions and Prologues is proud to be an evergreen podcast and was created by Adam Sokol. It was produced by Adam Sokol and Sean Rule Hoffman. And if you are interested in this podcast and any other evergreen podcast, you can go to evergreenpodcast.com to discover all the different stories we have to tell.